Hi, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon for the Mapping Resource Center workshop and session. Just quick notes on the Zoom platform if you're new to the platform or if you're familiar with it. We will be using the Q&A function for any questions that come up throughout the presentation and the session. So as they come up for you, please do file in your questions there, and we will get to them during certain question and comment segments throughout the session. Um, and as you're coming into the room, why don't you use the chat function to just let us know where you're tuning in from? We'd love to hear who you are and where you're from, your organization, if possible. Um, and we will be opening up the session shortly. Um, and as you do that, we'll also put up a poll for you all to fill out, and you'll just want to go ahead and scroll through that poll. And you should see that now. And we will look at the results of it shortly. So definitely use the chat to let us know where you're coming in from. Q&A for any questions that come up throughout the session. And the poll is live for you all now. And I can hand it over to you, Abby.
Thanks so much, Jasmine, and really wonderful to have you all here. I see those poll results are still coming in, so we'll give that just a moment, but I'm seeing a strong focus on biodiversity. Oh, and Jas, maybe you can share the results with everyone as we go. Strong focus on biodiversity. 91%, 90% or so of us are focused on biodiversity in the Appalachians. Over 60% focused on communities, 50% or more focused on water, another 50% on climate, and a few adding some other options in there, which we'll get details on and be very interested in later. And great to see also the diversity of scales that people are working at. I see the majority of folks working at the town and county scale, statewide scale, and folks all the way up to the national and international scale. So please do put your location if you want in the chat there. And we'd love to also see where people are calling in from. But this is wonderful to see just the diversity of places that people are focused on, and the different ways we can coordinate will be a big focus of our presentation. So I'm Abigail Weinberg. I'm Vice President for Science and Conservation Policy at Open Space Institute, and it's really exciting to be with you all this afternoon. As many of you know intimately, the Appalachian Mountains are our best bet for an intact long-range migration corridor through the densely populated eastern United States. They are a refuge for human and natural communities, shielding us from storms and producing our clean water for drinking and recreation. And for these reasons and so many more, OSI is excited to launch our 7-year Appalachian Landscape Project. We are launching this project in phases. And as Jasmine said just a moment ago, we'll focus today on our Appalachian Landscape Mapping Resource Center and how it can help harness our collective work for greatest impact. The project recognizes the need to evolve OSI's work in this region and to do this in collaboration with the people living in this region, the hundreds of conservation organizations focusing here, and the states overseeing the policies that will shape the future of this place. We're committed to doing this while continuing to deliver and support permanent land protection, which is the primary way we will track our progress. As a start, just last month, OSI launched our Capital and Catalyst funds, making nearly $5 million available for land protection and planning, which we'll chat a little bit more about later. For those of you who don't know OSI, this work builds on 25 years of investment in the Appalachians. In 2000, we expanded our direct acquisition work, which was focused in New York State, to help accelerate conservation in the Appalachians. We aggregated capital from foundations and private donors and used data and science to help focus that protection to address major issues of the day. You can see the distribution of OSI's grants. These dots cover 1.7 million acres across the region and represent the amazing work that many of you have done in this place and that we were fortunate enough to support. As the impacts of climate change became more evident, we expanded our work to support partners in developing science-informed conservation plans, resulting in 112 plans in the East, with many of these plans focused in the Appalachians. And the Appalachian forests are more important than ever for their critical forest carbon stores, for the way they buffer the impacts of extreme weather, and for the immeasurable values of nature to our individual and cultural well-being. So why are we deepening our investment in the Appalachians now? Here we're zoomed in to New York's Hudson Valley, the southern Vermont and New Hampshire, and western Massachusetts. So this is just to give us a picture of what's at stake. So we've protected 21% of the entire Appalachians region, which you can see here represented in the light green in this zoom in. Approximately 25% of the Appalachians region is converted out of natural cover into either development or farmland. The development is shown here in pink. So the loss of our forests and not other natural landscapes is not random. Humans need low elevation, fertile, porous soils and geologies for growing our food, and as mundane as it sounds, for burying our septic systems. These are shown, these low elevation, fertile places that are still resilient for habitat are shown in dark green. So this has pushed most of our protection into high elevation places. And you can see that in the Adirondacks, in Vermont's Green Mountains, in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And you can see that these are distinct from these low elevation fertile places. And in fact, 50 to 80% of the high elevation rock of the Appalachians is protected, and only 3 to 15% of the low elevation fertile places are protected. And these places become even more important to our human communities as the climate changes for buffering those impacts of extreme weather. So collectively, we're at this critical moment to help steer the future of this region. And how do we harness our efforts, the hundreds of indigenous communities and conservation groups that intimately know these landscapes, the states that set agendas, the big national organizations that deliver resources, and the communities that call this region home? How do we harness all of that to realize shared conservation goals? The Mapping Resource Center is built on the hypothesis that data, democracy, and effective mapping can galvanize collaboration, help set clear goals, and engage communities. And that when those elements are combined, we can align impact on the ground. To be successful, OSI needs to recognize our limitations, the boundaries in which we're working, and the elements that we're not covering. We'll need to be able to adapt to feedback and fold in new and emerging priorities as we go. And we are here to ask you to help us to do that. We've set out these 3 goals for the Appalachian Landscapes Project. They do not address all of the issues in the region. We hope clearly stating our own goals and tracking progress towards them can help identify synergies with our partners. Our 3 goals are to stabilize and support Appalachian biodiversity, maintain or increase the region's critical forest carbon stores and annual carbon capture, and ensure local communities receive the benefit and have a voice in conservation. In the coming months, one of our priorities is working with other organizations focused at the Appalachian scale to see where we can align. How can we harness our collective resources and bring those back to the broader field, working at those smaller scales across the Appalachians? Each of these 3 goals that you see on the screen correspond to a different resource value highlighted in our Mapping Resource Center. And shortly, we'll be able to go through those in great detail with the experts who created them. I'll introduce one of these briefly and then turn it over to others. So OSI relies on partnership for everything we do. We don't develop our own data and science. We identify critical resources and find ways to package and share them with the field. And working with partnership with Mark Anderson at Nature Conservancy Center for Resilient Conservation Science, we analyzed terrestrial and freshwater resilient habitat data put out by their program to develop a functional ecological network for the Appalachians in the East. This work elevates the urgency to protect those underprotected geologies and elevations that I talked about earlier, and we'll hear more about that. But we feel that tracking and reporting our progress is going to be essential for making the case for increased investment in the region and adapting our work where we have challenges. So we've set quantitative measures to track our progress towards each of these goals. Looking at our first goal around biodiversity, you can see we seek to increase the protection. Oops, that was a miss scroll. Looking at our first goal, you can see we're seeking to increase protection of resilient and those underrepresented settings, and that we're looking to also target our work effectively by ensuring that for every acre we protect, at least 80% of it is resilient and 30% of it is underrepresented. For each of our goals, we have these kinds of measures, which are all available on the Mapping Resource Center. In the spring of this year, we'll be adding a dashboard to the Mapping Resource Center. This will show progress that we're making towards our goals, our measurable goals. And you can see here the measures we've set from the earlier slide in a visual way, putting it in the context of all the historic conservation that's happened across the field, which is shown in the dark blue, as well as OSI's contribution to that through funding grants in that light blue or direct acquisition from our partners at OSI doing land conservation across the Appalachians in the dark blue. And then the light greens show what we hope the broader field in light green can contribute towards these same protecting these values, and then OSI's grant fund contribution and direct acquisition over the next 7 years in that dark green. So our dashboard will track and measure each of these elements. The Mapping Resource Center has little value without partnership. We'll dive into the Resource Center shortly and wanted to just briefly hear from you. How well do the goals we've set resonate with your own priorities? Does the idea of developing and working towards shared goals feel useful, even if they're different than the ones we've set? And we'll launch a quick poll on these questions. And at the same time, I welcome any comments or questions in the Q&A. I see that some people are indicating that, oh, and Jazz, you can go ahead and launch that second poll. And some people are indicating that the chat is disabled for them. So we can work on that. And I'm glad that people are putting their locations in the Q&A where they could. And if anyone has any comments or questions on that opening piece, we can take them now. And we'll send up that poll in a second.
Yes, so sorry about that chat function, little Zoom snafu. But definitely use the Q&A function while I work on trying to restore that.
So
And
this is great. Thank you all for jumping in on the poll. It looks like the idea of developing or working towards shared goals is appealing, at least to the folks filling out the poll. We've got 84% of those filling it out interested in that. Some maybe a little hesitant. 2% now coming in with a no. And then which goals resonate the most? We're seeing that focus on community and biodiversity, which was also evident earlier. And we'll really look forward to seeing other values and priorities you all care about when we get the detailed data. So Jazz, if you want to post those for everyone else to see, people can take a look at that. And then we can move on. I'm going to pass it on to Julia very soon.
are you able to see the results? Okay.
Julia, you can launch in whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is Kaya Yamane. I'm the cartographic designer at OSI. We will now go into a deep dive on the data resources available in the Mapping Resource Center. If you navigate to the Explore tab, you'll see a story map that guides you through the purposes, goals, and resource values of this tool. The first resource value, a critical climate resilience resource for plants and animals, will walk through the background and components of the Functional Ecological Network, or FEN. This is our Appalachian Landscapes Project, or ALP boundary, outlined in black. Forested lands are in green. The Appalachians are unique in that so much of the critical resources here are still intact. In dark gray, you can see current land protection. About 21%, or 33 million acres of the region, are protected to date. 55% of the region is above average resilient, shown here in light green. These forests are valuable because they're most likely to support plants and animals in a changing climate by providing connectivity and the diverse microclimates plants and wildlife need to migrate and adapt. In light blue, we show migration options for plants and animals to move between these large resilient landscapes. This data is also called migration potential or climate flow. Light green is above average resilient lands again. Dark gray is protected lands. 38% of the above average resilient lands are currently protected, and this is good news. While only 21% of the region as a whole in general is protected, much more of the above average resilient lands are protected. However, it does still mean that the remaining 62% of resilient lands in orange here are vulnerable to forest loss. Now we shift to focus on the diversity of geophysical settings across the region. Geophysical settings are a way to map the different bedrock and superficial geologies at various elevations. They're a good proxy for different habitat types. Protecting all geophysical settings is critical to supporting a broad range of biodiversity. Unfortunately, some geophysical settings have very little protection. The dark green represents geophysical settings that are underrepresented in conservation. These underrepresented settings are defined as geophysical settings that are less than 15% protected, though many of these settings may be as little as 3 or 4% protected. Adding protected lands again in dark gray helps us see the underrepresented resilient settings in need of protection. Underrepresented settings tend to be low elevation, rich, fertile settings that are historically favored for farming and development. Plants and animals also often prefer these fertile settings, and some rare and endemic species rely on specific geology types found in these settings for survival, like the gray bat that depends on limestone karst caves in the southeast. These underrepresented settings need special attention if we hope to ensure our forests support the full range of biodiversity. Here in light purple, we highlight places where land protection can support aquatic biodiversity. These places are terrestrially resilient and are part of healthy, intact watersheds that continue to support a broad range of aquatic plants and animals. OSI organized these data sets into the Functional Ecological Network, or FEN. This resource helps the conservation field rebalance our conservation portfolio to best protect the rich biodiversity of the East. Using this data, we'll track our progress towards protecting each of these resources. You can find more information about the datasets that were incorporated into the FEN, like resilience and climate flow, by visiting the Additional Resources tab on the Mapping Resource Center. And here we'll walk through the components of the FEN. So above average flow, above average resilience, freshwater resilient and connected network, or RCN, and above average resilience, underrepresented settings and above average flow, underrepresented settings and above average resilience, and underrepresented settings, freshwater RCN, and above average resilience. And I'll now hand it off to Julia to talk about the next resource value.
Thanks, Kai. My name is Julia Feller. I'm the Senior GIS Associate at OSI. The second primary resource value for conservation prioritization is forest ecosystem carbon. 74% of the Appalachians are forested, meaning the region is a critical carbon store for the US. For the ALP, we utilize a national forest carbon dataset to analyze where the most important forests for storing carbon are situated in the Appalachians. The darker the green, the more carbon stored. Developed by Drs. Natalia Hasler and Christopher Williams at Clark University and funded by OSI, the dataset measures metric tons of CO2 equivalent. That is a mouthful, but think about these forests as offsetting carbon emissions from human activities such as driving a car or cutting down trees. Furthermore, these forests, when they remain intact, will sequester additional carbon over time. Think about the rings in a cross-section of a tree. Each year, a new ring represents the rate of carbon sequestration, while the total of all rings represents the tree's carbon storage. The dataset we use measures sequestration potential out to 2050 and is symbolized here with blues representing positive sequestration. You will notice the rate of sequestration in the Appalachians is lower than in the southeastern wood basket, where there's frequent cutting and regrowth of forests. The Appalachian forest will continue to sequester carbon, but their strength is their large carbon stores. If these were lost, we would not be able to get this carbon back into the forest in time to address critical climate change goals. We look at the projected carbon storage potential for 2050 because it incorporates the current carbon storage with sequestration over the next 30 years. We use it to plan for a near-term future where development pressure might threaten both the highest storage and the highest sequestration potential forests. Also of note, these projections assume a grow-only scenario, meaning no active management of forests. This may be helpful for planning for a conservation scenario, but we do recommend checking recent aerial imagery if you're aware of harvesting in your area since 2020. Compared to the nation, the Appalachians store more carbon per acre than anywhere else in the East, hammering home the urgency of protecting as much of these forests as possible. For the ALP, we classified 2050 carbon storage potential into 5 categories around the mean of 329 metric tons of CO2e per acre. This is the equivalent emissions of 77 cars or 44 homes' energy usage for one whole year. This helps us identify the region's highest carbon forests, or those that are above average. These are the greens from the previous maps. We then identified areas that are at a moderate or high risk of land use conversion by 2050 to see where the high carbon forests are threatened. We used a model of conversion threat developed by Clark Labs and Esri that estimates conversion from and to any land use type. So for example, forested to developed or wetland to agriculture. By limiting these high threat areas to those within the high carbon forests in green, we can assume forest loss in these areas in pink purple. More research on carbon and conversion threat can be found and put into practice with the Avoided Forest Conversion tool linked in the Mapping Resource Center here. So you can further explore these climate resource values as well as assess other data sets in conjunction using the interactive map page of the Resource Center. Here, instructions here. Here you'll find climate data to visualize, including all of the components of the functional ecological network and the national carbon data. The Other Data tab includes a selection of associated data from across the field. We'll come back to some of these data sets shortly, but I'll note here that you can turn off the ALP mask to visualize data for the entire country where it's available. Click the 3 dots next to any item to open the details for more information. And using the 3 dots, you can also change the transparency of any layer. So for example, if you wanted to look at any data set over aerial imagery. For this, I'll zoom into Harrisonburg, Virginia, and choose the transparency on the carbon data just to show how you might be able to use these layering functions to analyze your area of interest. If you need to view instructions again, or if you're using this data in planning for ALP, capital, or catalyst grant applications, which we'll come back to, you can access the pop-ups using the buttons on the left-hand side here. And I will now pass it off to Joel to talk about some of the other data sets in the map and what it means for community-centered conservation.
Thanks so much, Julia. Yeah, Joel Hauser here, Director of Capital Grants for OSI. The people of the Appalachians are inextricably linked with the region's ecological health. And although it's easy to think of people separately from nature, we are in fact part of it. But we have to realize that we need to work with human communities in a different way, one that respects the dignity of people, that recognizes that people are living and working in highly biodiverse and ecologically important places, and one that balances protection with community needs. We've built community data into the Mapping Resource Center. These are in no way a replacement for on-the-ground knowledge or on-the-ground engagement. And also, they're not presented in any specific order by importance, but I'm going to talk about them in the order of how they're presented in the tool. It's important to note that people contain multitudes and that communities are not monoliths. We try to put things neatly into boxes, and sometimes that helps, but it can also hurt. So please do not use these data solely to inform community work, needs, and desires. Instead, use them to inform the larger picture. I'm briefly going to introduce several of the data sets, but remember that you can find more details in the additional resources tab at the top of the screen. The first data set we share is the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, or the SVI. Climate is a risk multiplier, so it's important to consider things beyond climate and conservation that may be impacting communities. The SVI gives general information of relative community vulnerability based on socioeconomic status, household composition and disability, minority status and language, housing type, and transportation. These are combined to create the index and often used for emergency preparedness. The SVI is also helpful for thinking about public health planning, environmental justice considerations, and of course, conservation planning. The next data set is FEMA's National Risk Index, or the NRI. This is a tool that identifies communities most at risk from 18 natural hazards, including hurricanes, floods, wildfires, droughts, and earthquakes. It provides a composite risk score based on three components, which expected annual loss, so the estimated financial loss to property from natural hazards, social vulnerability, so the susceptibility of social groups for harm from disasters, to harm from disasters, community resilience, so the ability of a community to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. Each component is scored and rated using percentile ratings and clustering to group communities into categories from very low to very high risk. It's worth noting that the Social Vulnerability Index is integrated directly into the National Risk Index. The next is the Community Resilience Challenges Index, or the CRCI. It's a composite index developed by FEMA to identify pre-disaster challenges to resilience. It draws from 22 indicators that span population characteristics, household characteristics, housing, but it also includes access to healthcare, economic factors, things such as smartphone ownership, access to emergency services, and others. And these data all work together. So three different indexes, but they are related. Information about these and how they relate is in the additional resources section, but I like to think of it like the Social Vulnerability Index identifies who is likely to be most vulnerable. The NRI shows where the risk is the highest, and the CRCI explains what resilience challenges exist and why. Other data on here is the indigenous territories data. This is provided by Native Land Digital, which strives to map indigenous lands in a way that changes, challenges, and improves the way people see history in the present day. This is a data set that may take a while to load, but it is good to explore. It shows a snapshot of who we know to have inhabited these lands prior to European settlement. It's easy to talk about indigenous lands as a thing of the past, but these people and their descendants are still here, still leading, will be part of the future. They're critical partners in conserving this landscape. This data helps us name past inhabitation. And a parting note is that aside from the Indigenous Territories data in the Mapping Resource Center, which has its own tragic implications, these data are perhaps rightly so based on challenges, but each person in each community also has opportunity. And so when we're working with people in communities, it's incumbent on us to understand the challenges and vulnerabilities for a baseline, but really to work toward that opportunity. And identifying those opportunities will require more local knowledge. And so the data are here to steer us, but don't create a total strategy. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joel. So you have all of this data. Now, what can you do with it? I'll show you two examples. First, how to evaluate conservation values of a property, and then examine an entire service area. So to illustrate how to work with the FEN and carbon data, I'll pull in one of OSI's past capital grants in the Appalachians. To add in data, open the tab in the top right, in this case to upload a shapefile. After clicking to add data and going to File up top, I will pull in my zipped shapefile from my local device. Click OK, click Done. And importantly here, you have to click the 4-circle actions button and add to map after uploading your data. It'll then zoom to the data's location. So this is Custard Hollow. It is 620 acres along the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, and it was permanently protected in 2022. I'll make it a little bit transparent here so we can look at the data. And then turn on the functional ecological network to see that there are several different categories of the fen which build upon each other on this property. So if I turn on terrestrial resilience data, I can see that all of the property is above average in green. The purples on the fen indicate areas of freshwater resilient connected network. So if I go and turn that data set on, I can see that about a quarter of the property includes freshwater watersheds in need of protection in the light blue. Dark green and purple on the fen indicate that there are underrepresented settings. So if I go to that data set, I can turn on the specific settings and click on the yellow to see that there's a good amount of low elevation calcareous, or the limestone associated with the ecologically significant caves on the eastern side of the property. Now, if we turn to the carbon data, we can see that this property, which is still transparent from before, we can see that this property doesn't have the highest carbon values for the Appalachians, given the range of yellows and greens. But we can click, I'll turn this off, click to see that the property still stores somewhere between 250 and 300 metric tons of CO2e per acre in 2020, which is still significant. I will add, this is an above average project. So keep in mind that these tools are only to help assess, prioritize, and tell the story of your projects. Your local knowledge of the property can supplement all of these data sets. Hallie will talk a bit more later about using these data sets for OSI grant opportunities, specifically how we will use the ones shown for scoring capital applications. However, users can also use this data to examine their service area and understand the places that they work. Here, I'll use the study area of one of OSI's Land and Climate Catalyst grantees, Rangeley Lakes Heritage Trust, or RLHT. In 2022, this Maine-based group built a conservation model for strategic prioritization of their landscape, the Upper Androscoggin River Subbasin. I already have this boundary in ArcGIS Online, so going back to add data, I can pull it in by searching RLHT boundary. Sorry, I need to pull the actual name. Apologies. Okay, great. And once again, once I click done, add actions and add to map to jump to the boundary. At a quick glance at some of the data that we saw before, we can see that the property is incredibly resilient in the greens here, and it encompasses some of the most crucial migration corridors in the Appalachians in the dark blues. RLHT also brought in the human element with data such as viewsheds and lands with historic significance, including the National Register of Historic Places. I know this is a publicly accessible and authoritative data set, so going back to add data, I can search this time the Living Atlas to add this layer. Once again, click done, actions, add to map, and I can see and zoom in on the National Register of Historic Places. This data might help me get an idea of existing partnerships, local resources, community values, etc. You also might want a snapshot of demographics in your project region to understand the people impacted by a project. So here, back in the Other Data tab, we can go to the American Community Survey data, which is Census Bureau data, to see that communities in the project area have a low median income in these dark purples, are largely elderly in the dark blues here, and might have limited access to internet in the dark purples. A fair warning with all of this, this tool is primarily visual and cannot summarize metrics for you. I've demonstrated the initial steps you might take before engaging in analysis that incorporates your on-the-ground knowledge, like, for example, imperiled species or trail networks, things that RLHT did in their modeling process. Our interactive map might be helpful as a starting place for determining climate data sets worth exploring further, or it might be a way to grab some high-level insights for project buy-in or storytelling. Once again, to go more in depth on the science, community benefits, and other stewardship resources across the field, you can visit the Additional Resources tab up top here.
Thank you so much, Julia, Kai, and Joel. Wonderful overview. We have some questions that have been answered in the Q&A that everyone, I hope, can see. So if you want to just take a look at the exchange that's happening in that answered section, that's great. And then we have two questions, one about federal data, vulnerability, sort of the vulnerability of federal data, and what's the prognosis on the future of this data. I had one thought, but then open it up to anyone else at OSI that wanted to comment on this. For the data sets that we're using that are maintained and developed by federal agencies, you know, we are at the whim of their decisions about whether to maintain and continue to share them publicly on ArcGIS online systems. So, you know, we will continue to use them as long as we can. I do suspect they won't be updated during this administration, and that is something to keep in mind, that they may become out of date. OSI is also taking a leadership role in ensuring certain data on climate, for example, are available publicly. We funded the creation of the forest carbon data set, an update to it, and are making that available in a variety of ways. It also still remains on a federal website as well, so until they find it. And yeah, anybody else want to comment on that? And the other question was about protected land. We had a few questions about the protected land database, which is interesting. We've also paid a good amount of attention to that. And Neil, if you want to comment on that further, you can. This comment was specifically about heavy harvesting happening on some state lands. And how do we kind of categorize those lands? Do we consider them protected if those kinds of activities are still happening? And we do consider them protected if they're under a formal protection status by the state. But we do also benefit from the Nature Conservancy's kind of gap status classifications, which indicate if that protected land is currently actively harvested, if it's protected specifically for biodiversity, or if it's an agricultural type protection. So that status helps us differentiate a bit between what is protected and understand it with a little more nuance. And we actually will be partnering with the Nature Conservancy to do some active updating to the protected land on an annual basis, because the protected area database is a bit slow to get updated and often has a lot of errors. So that will be a priority. And Jazz also, yeah, anything you want to add on that, Neil?
I'd love to add to
Yeah.
part of Ned's question. And Ned, I appreciate you raising this. And and it's a tricky one. And it really highlights the different ways that we use protected lands. And how we manage them. And so, we're not yet to our the grant evaluation portion of this, but we will, we do really think about stewardship when we're evaluating proposals, because not all levels, as Abby was just saying, not all levels of protection are exactly the same. And here in Tennessee, and especially atop the Cumberland Plateau, where I think you're thinking about, there's a strong tension between managing for native grasslands that are gone from the landscape, and then and also managing for those rich cove forests. And so it is something that it's just a tricky one, and appreciate you bringing that up. But as Abby said, it would still fall under the definition of protected.
Abby, you're muted.
Thank you. We had quite a few questions about the recording, and so just wanted to mention verbally that the whole session is recorded, and we'll be sending that out to everyone that registered for the session. Yeah. And I don't see any more questions coming in. We are going to pass it over to Hallie Schwab. And in the meantime, and we will have time for questions after that. So I wanted you all to feel free to continue to add questions to the chat, but also to, if you wanted to share any additional comments about partnering and the data and resources and how this might support partnering across the apps, we'd welcome comments on that, which we'll share. Either you can share in the chat now that that's working, or in the Q&A, and we'll share those after Hallie presents. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Abby, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Hallie Schwab, and I'm the Conservation Planning Manager at OSI. So at this point in the presentation, you've seen a lot of the features of the Mapping Resource Center in action. So what I'd like to do is just recap some of the ways the platform can help inform conservation work across the Appalachian region. And as Julia we'll bring that slide back up. But as Julia demoed earlier, you can use the project upload tool to understand resource values advanced by your conservation project and utilize this information to inform grant proposals or communications. OSI designed the Mapping Resource Center in part to aid applicants to 2 grant programs that we're offering through the Appalachian Landscapes Project. So in just a moment, I'm going to run through those opportunities briefly. As you saw in the example from Maine, you can also assess conservation values across a broader region to help prioritize your work for higher impact, for example, by identifying high carbon forests or critical migration corridors across your state, county, or service area. And the Mapping Resource Center can also be used to inform municipal or county scale planning for community scale planning for climate resilience. One thing that I think is really powerful about this set of tools is the ability to contextualize your work within a broader landscape and to tell a fuller story about how your work contributes to larger climate goals. And so on the next slide, I'd like to just direct you now to the ALP Grants tab. This is the portion of the Mapping Resource Center with information about 2 active grant opportunities available from OSI through the Appalachian Landscapes Project. And I won't spend a lot of time here describing each of these programs in detail because we have extensive guidance on our website, and recently held an applicant webinar that covered all you need to know to apply. This webinar was also recorded and is available to watch back if you, for those of you who weren't able to join us live. And so we'll be sure to share links to the ALP webpage and applicant materials in the follow-up to today's webinar. But if you're in the Mapping Resource Center, you can head to the ALP Grants tab to find links to the grant pages on OSI's website, as well as more information about eligibility, capital funding availability, and capital grant scoring criteria. If you still have questions after that, I'd really encourage you to reach out to a member of the OSI staff. We have points of contact in each of the regions and for the specific grant funds that you'll hear about today. So to support the goals of the Appalachian Landscapes Project, OSI is offering capital grants to support permanent land protection through the purchase of land or conservation easements. Up to $4.6 million are available for capital grants this round across the entire geography. And generally, we expect to make grants in the $150,000 to $200,000 range. Catalyst grants support climate-informed planning to accelerate the pace and effectiveness of land protection and stewardship, and up to $150,000 are available for catalyst grants in the fall round, and applicants can request up to $20,000 for projects. Proposals for both the fall round of both capital and catalyst grants are due on December 5th. So back on the ALP grant tab in the Mapping Resource Center, if you scroll down the page, you'll find a screening tool that can be used to check your eligibility for capital or catalyst grants. There are two ways to see if your project falls within the ALP boundary, and that's by either uploading a shapefile using the button on the right-hand side, or using the search function to zoom into a city, town, or address, as you've seen demonstrated earlier. If you do upload a shapefile, it will appear on the map as shown here, so you can confirm that your project is indeed within the ALP funding boundary. On the next slide, just a bit further down the page, you'll find more information about the breakdown of funding availability for capital grants specifically. The map you see here, which is included on the website, shows the funding available Appalachians wide, as well as several regions with dedicated geographically restricted funds. To help applicants of the ALP Capital Grant prepare their proposals, we've pulled out a subset of data sets that will be used in project evaluation in a special section, again, under the ALP Grants tab. And there was a question about this earlier in the chat. So important to know that for the fall grant round, OSI staff will run all of the metrics that are used for scoring projects, but applicants can use this portion of the Resource Center to upload a project shapefile and visualize the data sets that will be used by OSI to evaluate capital grant projects. On the next slide, you can quickly reference the ALP capital scoring criteria by selecting the ALP criteria tab in the top left corner. This will take you to a pop-up like it's shown here, which displays both the data sets and how they'll be scored as part of OSI's project evaluation process. Again, we hope that the Mapping Resource Center will be a tool with broad applicability to organizations working across the Appalachian region at multiple scales, whether you're applying for a grant this round or not. So that's all our prepared content. We'd love to spend the remainder of our time today answering your questions and hearing more about your feedback about how you might use this or what would be helpful in your informing your work. I'll hand it back to Abby.
Well, and I think at this point we can hand it over to the audience here. Jazz, are we able to unmute people or like if they raise their hands?
I may be able to do that, yeah.
So I would really welcome people to raise their hand using the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. And then we'd love to hear from you, how is this resource useful? And how might you be interested to partner in this region? or anything you want to share. And Molly, are you there? I can ask, yeah. I did notice your hand was up for a very long time. So I was wondering if that was intentional. Okay, I think that was oh.
It was unintentional. Okay.
Just to speak really quickly to a few questions in the Q&A about the accessibility of the data, both for download and on ArcGIS Online. All of the data in the Mapping Resource Center is publicly available either from us at OSI or from other sources, Living Atlas, etc. So if you go to the item details as shown before, you can access the service links to bring them into your own maps. And then if you'd like to download the data to run metrics yourself, use it in ArcGIS Pro or any other format, it will be available in the additional resources tab for download soon. In the meantime, you can reach out. I think it was said that our contact information will all be posted in the follow-up, so feel free to just email us.
So we have a question. Is it better to have a really pristine site or a site that needs restoration in terms of stabilizing soil, restoring buffers, and removing invasive species? Maybe I'll turn that over to Joel.
Yeah, what a great question. Because I think they're both important. And we think about them in different ways. If it's a really pristine site, protection is the order of the day, and making sure that stewardship can maintain the pristine nature of the property. If it's one that needs restoration and help, there are major ecological benefits from that. But we will want to see, as we're reviewing applications, we'll want to see that there is a feasible plan for that restoration, and those costs do fall outside of the scope of the grant fund.
The other thing I just add to that is that some of the data sets don't lend themselves to kind of valuing restoration. So we do take that into consideration. So if a project, has a farm field or a field that's going to be reforested, we'll consider the fact that the connectivity of that site would increase as that was restored. But we will be fairly, looking for that commitment to ensure that that restoration is going to be permanent and well cared for. We had another question about sharing projects. So always a lot of interest in our grant funds and sharing projects that we funded using these grants. So can we give some examples of the values? And Hallie's going to take that one. Great.
Well, I just wanted to point to another layer embedded in the Mapping Resource Center that Julia is going to pull up for us. But in terms of the Catalyst grants, we have a really cool feature where you can actually search for past projects, click on the dots, and learn about some of the work that's been done in the past. So I would just direct you to, yeah, Julia's going to show it. It's in the Other Data tab. And then, yeah, you can turn on that layer. It says OSI and LTA Climate Catalyst Grants. And you can click on any of these dots and get a little description of what they did and who did the project. So I'd encourage you to check that out. We've funded a lot of really interesting planning work at multiple scales. But yeah, maybe I'd pass it over to Joel to talk about maybe some of our capital work.
Yeah, the capital work is, I guess we can see them both on here. Yeah, the capital grants, I mean, this shows the kind of scope of properties that we have supported in clusters over time. One thing that I do, want to point out looking at this map is kind of the gap in the middle. And this grant round, we still have, dedicated funding in some of the places we've historically worked, but we're trying to be very intentional about expanding into areas where we haven't. And so I'm looking squarely at, Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, Western Virginia, Southeast Ohio, because there is so much work that needs to be done. So I like to see, where the distribution is on here because of all the great work that's happened. And yeah, you can see on the functional ecological network how these lie.
The thing I was going to mention was that this is the first round of grants under this exact data and criteria. So we don't have, this set of projects that are, excelling through this round, but I will say they do vary. And we find there are small, Limestone Valley parcels that might be quite expensive that we still think are important because of the values of protecting those rich, fertile, low elevation soils. And then there are very large upland projects that are also important to these large forest blocks. So you do see the range of those in these projects. And I think, Julia, if you zoom in quite a bit, you do end up seeing the parcel boundaries on these, I believe. No?
We don't have parcel boundaries on here, but
Yeah.
that is something that you can add from the Living Atlas. If you just search parcel, it should be the first one to come up, regrid.
Oh, I meant the parcel boundaries of the projects we funded.
Oh, we don't have those.
Okay.
For
Okay, there you go. I'm learning too.
Abby, just
Abby,
to maybe like build on that for a second, that this idea of what project type is or what's sort of representative of the group that will fund. And I think Joel, just said it really well, but I want to emphasize it that we really see a lot of room for diversity in terms of the project types that get funded through the capital grant round. And it's not just going to be about who scores best overall or which projects score best overall, but really looking at a wide set of projects and seeing where are the outstanding examples in particular categories is also going to be really interesting for us. So projects that you are working on, you feel like are really outstanding in one of the areas in the criteria are really worth submitting because we're going to be looking for projects that are representative in that way, so that overall we're building a portfolio of projects that get funded in this round that really show show the strongest results in terms of those criteria. And that's a particular interest of ours. It's also, I think, a great way to build a case and to sort of represent and highlight the various kinds of work that are all contributing across Appalachians to achieving conservation across this landscape.
Abby, I was just thinking it could be worth amplifying one of the questions that was answered in text, but Ed asks, is it possible to obtain a quantitative scoring summary for an area defined by a shapefile, or do we need to qualitatively assess the data in the map to come up with a value such as 67% terrestrial resilience? And Neil, do you want to just address that again?
Yeah, sure. So we are working to incorporate that functionality in the future rounds, but for this first round, if you want to know those exact numbers, feel free to share your boundaries with us, and we are happy to run those metrics for you.
Freely sharing Neil's email, but on the on the grant websites, there's contact information for all of the field coordinators. You can also send shapefiles to them, Joel, Sarah, and Bill, yeah, or bother any of us with them, and we will get that back to you very quickly.
We'll also be sure to share staff contact information in our follow-up, again, along with this recording of the presentation, and resources that have been pointed out throughout the session, post-session.
And there's Bill. We are at time, So I think we can wrap it up. And thank you very much for your time coming to join us for this. And we'll look forward to hearing how it works. Please be in touch with any challenges or ideas that you have, and we'll continue to evolve and be in touch as the work continues.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for the comments and support.